Thank you so much for coming to our session today. There are plenty of seats up front, so if you're in the back, you can feel free to have a seat anywhere that works for you. So we are presenting today, our topic is how to get to yes in your career. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means, but first we're going to introduce ourselves. So, Catherine?
So my name's Catherine Ciano, and I work in the Tank Center as a behavioral health provider.
And my name is Emma Strong. I'm one of the academic advisors with the Fall Program for Freshmen. And we also wanted to talk a little bit more about why we decided to present on this topic today. So with the theme of the NOW conference this year being owning your career, when I was thinking about that idea, this is something that came to mind in terms of a mindset that I've had in the past that I feel helps me feel that I have ownership over my career. And so it was something that I thought might be worth sharing with all of you.
And for me, and in terms of what I'm contributing to the presentation, sometimes you're kind of in a place and you want to be somewhere different than where you are, but something's getting in the way of that. And so sometimes there are very real obstacles, and it's like you can feel stuck and not know how to get there. And at the same time, sometimes it just feels powerless, like you don't really have any control. And so we're going to be learning some tools, some strategies about what you can do to overcome those obstacles and get to that place, that whatever that yes is for you.
First of all, we're going to define what this yes is that we're talking about. So what do we mean when we say getting to yes? I'm going to share an example from my own experience, and then we're going to have you all reflect on your experience and your own, what a yes might be for you. And then we're going to finish up with some goal setting and a plan of action for moving forward. So what we mean when we say the idea of yes, what we're really talking about there is thinking about your current situation and what are some different factors or opportunities that might be available to you in your situation that might help you advance your career in the direction that you want it to go. And whenever you're presented with an opportunity, there are factors that are going to sway you more towards saying, no, that's not really for me. I don't think I'm qualified for that. I'm not going to really go for that. And then there might be other factors that are going to sway you more towards saying, yes, this is something that I want to do. It's something I want to try. I'm going to take a risk and try something different or new or pursue this opportunity. So that's what we mean when we say getting to yes, is trying to figure out what are those obstacles that are getting in the way of you pursuing your next opportunity, and what are ways that you can increase the chances that if it's something that you really want to do, but you're facing some obstacles, you might actually go ahead and say yes to that and take a risk and do your next career move. So to illustrate this, I'm going to give an example from my own experience. So when I first started in my current role, I didn't have a lot of autonomy at work. And I didn't actually realize that this was a value that was important to me until I didn't have it. But basically what happened was the team structure that I came into was very, very collaborative, which is great, but it also meant that there was not a lot of individual leadership on projects. And the other thing was that the role had been vacant for a while, and so some of those job duties had been absorbed by other folks, and they weren't necessarily getting handed back to me right away. And so I was in this place where I was feeling like I didn't really have anything that I was able to have control over or take leadership on or put my own sort of spin on. And that was becoming a little bit demotivating for me, because it turns out that having autonomy at work, at least in a few of my projects, is something that's really important to me. So what happened was I found out that there was a project that has to be done in our office on a yearly basis. It's not interesting at all. Nobody else wanted to do it. It has to get done. It's a filing project. It's very insignificant in the grand scheme of what our office does. But it was a project and nobody else was leading it. And so I decided that I was going to volunteer to take that project on, and that I was going to make the best filing process we had ever seen in the history of the world, and that I was going to just take ownership over it and make it my own and not overcomplicate it, but make it really effective and something that I thought I could contribute to our workflow. So the result of that was that, first of all, I was just happier, because even though it's a very insignificant project, it was fun for me to have that feeling that I actually had the ability to take control of something. And then more long term, my supervisor saw what I did with that very, very small project, and then over time began to give me a few more opportunities here and there to lead more projects. And so I believe that, at least in part, that was because she saw that I could deliver on this very, very small project and then trusted me with other opportunities. So that's my example. And so breaking that down a little bit more, there were some obstacles that I faced in that situation. One, as I mentioned, was the team structure. Another one was management, in the sense that my boss wasn't directly assigning me work that was very going to allow me to have a lot of autonomy or independence. But then other obstacles I was experiencing was a little bit of self-doubt. So I was starting to think things like, if they're not giving me responsibility, maybe that means that I'm not doing well in this role so far. Maybe they don't trust me to do a good job, or what if they give me a responsibility and then I'm not able to deliver on that and the result's not satisfactory? What's going to happen then? So the result of all of these obstacles was that I was essentially waiting for someone else to give me an opportunity to just deliver on my goal of having autonomy. And so in other words, I was waiting for the environment to change versus recognizing that there might be other tools at my disposal where I could actually have an impact on my own situation. So we're going to talk more about this as we go on in the session, but I also want to just recognize the fact that the obstacles that an individual person is facing in any situation are going to be different depending on that person. So the obstacles that I face were very specific to me. So the fact that I am a white, able-bodied, heterosexual young woman, those are all factors that came into play in terms of the types of obstacles that I was or was not facing at that time. And so just to kind of keep that in our awareness that two different people could have very different experiences of the same situation. And what we're hoping to offer today is the idea that starting from wherever it is that you are there ways that you can look at a situation in which you may have felt stuck previously? You may have felt disempowered, or like you didn't have a lot of control over your career trajectory. Can you take a second look at that situation and see opportunities you might not have recognized before? And if so, how are you going to move forward and get to those?
Okay, so this is a visual representation of kind of where we're starting and where we're going today. So, for example, we can start in the red where we're in a place of comfort. So it's kind of predictable, it's kind of safe here. We don't really have to change if it's working well enough for us. And where we're trying to go, we're actually trying to go to the green. So we haven't talked about values yet, but values are about what do I want, my life to be about if we're talking about values as a whole. If we're talking about values as your career, what do I want in my career? What's important to me? And values are different from goals because goals you can just check off and you accomplish them. Values is more of a direction. So you're saying these are things that are important to me and this is kind of what I would like in my professional career. And so where you are today, the question is, okay, is this working for me? Do I feel like I am having the career and the work life that's congruent with my values? And if it's not working for you, then it's like, okay, what kind of changes do I need? And so if we're going for the green, the place of yes that we're talking about is that place of willingness and that place of action, then that's where we're gonna try to get to. But to get to the green, we're gonna go to the blue, and to get to the blue, we have to go through the yellow place there. So that's kind of what we're calling obstacles. And obstacles, as you can see, some of the word choices that I use is like uncertainty. We don't know how it's going to turn out. So even when we're thinking, okay, this isn't working for me, but what are my opportunities? What can I do? And it might not work out the way I want. It might fail. It might, all these reasons why not. And that's a choice that we can make. Or we can say, okay, it's going to feel uncomfortable. It is uncertain. It is risk involved. And it's important for me to do this because this green is important. And so I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to understand that if I can get there to that yes, I'm going to learn. I'm going to keep growing. And so it's an opportunity for you. So this is kind of our journey. We're going from the orange to the blue, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to kind of get over some of those obstacles, as well as take some time to kind of identify what are your values and what's important for you. And Emma's going to go ahead and talk more about values.
Yes, so you all have a handout for this session. And so what I would like you to do right now, there is a list of career values on your handout. And you also have, by the way, a copy of the circle diagram we just showed if you want to refer back to that. But there's a list of career values that folks will commonly find important. It's not an exhaustive list, so if there's a value that you feel is really important to you that's not on there, you can either write it in or you can just work with the list that we have for today. And I want you to identify what do you feel are your top 5 career values from that list. So you're gonna write those down in the box below, and then as you're thinking about each of those values, I want you to think about your current career situation at Berkeley. So that includes your job as well as any other activities or responsibilities you have as a member of the UC Berkeley community. So thinking about your current situation, do you feel that that career value is currently being fulfilled at the moment or not? And when you're choosing yes or no, it's helpful to just go with your first instinct, so you don't have to overthink it too much. If you're not sure, just go with what your first instinct is for that. So we're writing down your top 5 values, marking if they're fulfilled or not right now, and then I'd like you to turn to a partner next to you and introduce yourself, and then tell them what were your top values and are they being fulfilled or not right now. So go ahead. All right, come on back. You'll have more opportunities to talk with your partner, don't worry, yes. Thank you so much for being so engaged. So now that you've had a chance to talk a little bit about your career values and consider whether they're being fulfilled right now for you or not, we want to start thinking about what are the types of things that you could possibly say yes to in your career that might help you address your current values gap. Let's take a quick sort of temperature check first though. So raise your hand, how many folks felt that 3 or more of your top 5 values are currently being fulfilled? Oh, great, that's awesome. All right, what about 4 or more? All 5? Someone said, we hate you. That's great. So if your top 5 values are all being fulfilled right now, then you can just use this session to expand on one of those and do it, focus on it even more possibly. Who was feeling like 2 or fewer are currently being fulfilled? All right, great. So hopefully by the end of this session, you may have some additional ideas that you can kind of bring to the mix there. So we want to start thinking about what could we say yes to that might help address what we're calling your values gap right now. So the gap between the career values that you hold and where you are currently, right? So this feeling of being a little bit stuck or dissatisfied or unmotivated, if that's where you're at right now, it's worth taking a look at your core values to determine whether or not they are being fulfilled right now. Because if you're feeling those ways, it might be related to the fact that there's something that you really find important that you're not getting to do right now. So that's the point here, is thinking about, are there ways that you could be doing those things, even taking into account your current situation? And if so, how do you get there? So coming up with ideas for things that you could say yes to can be difficult, especially if you've been looking at your current situation and you haven't seen those opportunities previously. So now that you've shared with your partner what some of your values are, you're gonna return to talking to that partner, and what you're going to talk through is looking at your current situation with a fresh perspective. Are there any things that you can think of that you could do or try or pursue that might help you fulfill your values more fully? So an example of this could be if somebody's really interested in collaboration, they like working with others, but currently their work is very solitary. They might decide they're going to join a campus staff organization or a community of practice, and that could be a way for them to incorporate more collaboration into their time at the university, even if their actual job description doesn't require that. So that's just an example. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing before you jump into the exercise as it pertains to values. And so the way we kind of have set it up so far is we made it a very black and white yes or no thing. But what I want to go ahead and do, since a lot of you are like, yeah, I'm here, I'm living my values, or I'm working my values, but I want to go ahead and put it on a continuum. So now we're not talking about are they there or not, but now it's like, okay, to what degree? Is it how much of my work is congruent? Maybe it's just 20%, and I would love for like 80% of what I get to do be more congruent. So again, if you're like, it's here, but I would like it to be more here, then that could also be pretty important as you're thinking about what you want your yes to be and in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And just the last tip for this next piece is that as you're thinking of ideas of things that you might be able to do, those obstacles might come to mind as well as you're thinking of those ideas. That's natural. So for the purposes of the exercise right now, we're going to talk about obstacles next. But for right now, I want you to treat this as a brainstorm. I think Shadon mentioned this morning the idea of limitless possibilities. So that's the world, the utopia we're going to live in for the next few minutes as you talk to your partner of if you were able to do whatever it is that you wanted to do, what would you be saying yes to either address the values gap you have or increase the level of fulfillment of your core values. All right? So it's just a discussion, and turn to your partner and talk about your possible yes. All right. So this is obviously a conversation that could continue for a lot longer. We're not going to come up with the perfect yes for you in 3 minutes, right? And we're going to talk more about the things that you've identified a little bit later as we continue to move on. But just for right now, was anybody not able to think of something that you could say yes to that would help with your current values gap and you'd like the help of either us or the group to think of some ideas? Anyone in that situation?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
So in your discussion with your partner, we're wondering if anybody was unable to identify an opportunity that might help you address your the values that you want to fulfill, and if so, we can kind of pool the group together to try to come up with some ideas of something that you might be able to have as your idea of your yes in mind. Is anyone in that situation? Yeah.
So not all supervisors and managers get the same training, as you know.
Yes.
There is a supervisor that is ineffective and is unwilling to make change.
Right. So
People recognize people.
yeah. So the comment was just that not all supervisors and managers get the same training. And so if you're in a situation where you're not feeling like your supervisor is supportive of your professional development, that's a really hard place to be at. So what was one of the values that you identified that was important to you that you would ideally like to have more of in your career?
I do a lot of helping others, but I have, right now we have a situation where I feel like the supervisor's being ineffective and not really helping. And I want to step my foot right in there and help them. I know it's not my job.
Yeah.
But
So you would like to have,
to help my team get promoted.
yeah. Would you say that you have the experience of helping others in other areas of your career and you're just stuck in this one situation right now?
I'm not a supervisor. I'm an independent or individual contributor.
Sure.
I do customer service, so I'm always helping people. I just want to apply that to my team.
Got it. Okay. So
Yeah, and so I'm wondering, is it that would you like to be able to help them, but you feel that you need to be in a former supervisory role in order to be able to help them?
I can't change my supervisor, and I don't know if I can influence or negotiate for her to make the changes.
So from where you're sitting, it's your supervisor's role to help them. You see that they need help, and you're unable to help them, and you feel you don't have the authority to help them. And so for you, being able to help people in need is an important value for you.
got it.
Okay. And so what we're trying to find out is what your yes is, which means what do I need to do differently than what I'm doing so that I can help, because I can't just see people that need help and not do anything about it. So that your yes would be, okay, what do I need to do differently? What are opportunities that maybe I haven't looked at? And I'm saying this out to the group too, because you guys may have some suggestions in terms of different ways she might be able to think or look at things that can facilitate that for her outside of just being delegated formal authority to do so.
Yeah. Any ideas? Yeah.
So this may not immediately affect the change that you want, because that sounds like a difficult scenario. I guess I wonder if there are opportunities for you to take on more of a mentorship or like a team lead role in your.
Team lead at the moment.
Okay, great. So I guess you're heading in that direction. I guess my idea was that it sounds like you may be interested in supervisory duties in the future. And so I don't know if that would allow you to help your current team, but if you were able to continue to build on that leadership role that you already have, then you may find yourself in a situation where you are a supervisor and able to, live out that value that you have of really helping to provide professional development opportunities for your team.
Great. So just for the purposes of the recording, the suggestion was to have a leadership role within the team, and it sounds like that's already something that you do have, is you are the team lead, but kind of even pursuing that further, possibly, and possibly looking into a formal management role. Yeah, Karen.
I just had as like a clarifying question, the help that they need, is that I don't know where to find this, I need training on the software, is it more like workflow, I need help like finding time to do all of this?
Yeah, so the question is what kind of help,
Is it a knowledge gap, or is it like a performance hindrance?
what kind of help the team needs?
Trying to keep our employees from burning to the gross.
Okay.
This would help motivate and show recognition.
Yeah. So the core issue that you're interested in is retention and making sure that they feel valued. Yeah. Did you have a comment?
So, well, I know we both have something to say, but please.
Yeah.
So, my 2 cents token is that, I think the lady you mentioned, like your supervisor, your observation is your supervisor is not willing to change, right? So maybe the next step for you to do is to find out more about why he or she is not willing to change, right? What are the concerns your supervisor has, behind the scene, right? So maybe eventually you can find even a small common Zoom you folks can share. That's like, I feel that can be a breakthrough moment there. And then you can, when you find more about on that side, you can even suggest something like, how about we do like, like experimental thing, like pilot a small program or proposal, not completely move into it, but as a test out for a few months, see how it goes.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so that suggestion was to kind of try to connect a little bit more with your supervisor and just find out what is their hesitancy or resistance that you're experiencing or that you're perceiving right now. Where is that coming from? And are there actually areas of common ground where you could make some suggestions? Great. Should you have a comment as well?
Just to, I think we're sitting too close together. So we're sharing the same brain.
They're just sharing the same ideas.
So I fear, do I have much more to add? The other thing I would say though is that sometimes, because we don't see at all times all the different things on the supervisor's plate, there are times when someone ends up in a supervisory role, not because they know how to manage and lead a team, but it was a circumstance that put them into those roles. And so there are times where if you do a one-on-one with that person, is to sometimes share what it is that your personal professional development goals are, and to really try and match that up. Because sometimes I think where we fail is to say, here's what I need, here's what I need, instead of sometimes saying, here's what I can offer that I see that the team needs.
Sure.
And then if we phrase it like that, and maybe a lot of these things is about sometimes selling our skills or reselling our skills to remind them what it is. Because sometimes we're so overwhelmed as supervisors to figure out what's actually going on. And we get into this task and just checking things off and not realizing we have these wonderful folks around us that have all these great skills.
Yeah, great. Great suggestion. So yeah, that suggestion was to, again, not all supervisors necessarily have, as you mentioned at the beginning, had training in management. They may not know all the best ways to lead a team. And so the suggestion was to, rather than saying like, here's what I need, to come to the supervisor and say, here's the need that I'm seeing, here's what I can offer, here's what I'd like to do to help, and see if you can align those goals, right? That was your point. All right, great. Okay, so you have some ideas to work with for today? All right, wonderful. Great. All right.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about obstacles. And so now that, for the most part, everyone has a yes, sometimes there are things that are getting in the way of our yes. So that's what an obstacle is defines. What's getting in the way? Obstacles can be internal or external. So when I say internal, I'm talking about things that are internal to you. So maybe your own emotions, fear, uncertainty, those types of things. Maybe your own thoughts about your own capabilities, your own physiological sensations. So maybe just sometimes stepping out, creates a whole lot of anxiety and you just can't get yourself to do it. Internal obstacles. External obstacles are things that are outside of you. So that's when we're talking about the environment. We're talking about other people. That could be bosses and things like that as well. And so those are things that are outside of you. And so as we talk about the skills, things that we're thinking about is like, is it internal, is it outside of me? And then we're going to relate to them differently depending on what the obstacle is. So, do anything to add?
What's that?
Are we going to add anything?
No.
Okay. All right. So this is a representation of kind of the different categories that some of the obstacles can fall into. You might have some that don't fit into these categories, but I do think that for the most part, many of them will. So when we're talking about thoughts, again, things that are going on in your head, to be distinguished from an emotion, which is what you feel. And it's important to separate those two things out. We say all the time, like, I feel like they don't care. You think they don't care. You might feel frustrated. The reason why it's important to separate those out is because we're going to interact with them differently, and the amount of control that we have over those two things is different depending on what it actually is. So just keep that in mind. So beliefs are, I think about like things that are going on in our head as a tree, where like the leaves are like the self-talk, things that we say to ourselves, and then we have like automatic thoughts that just come. We don't even put any effort forth thoughts, and then as we drill down to the roots, we get to like the core beliefs. So sometimes you can just address some of the leaves, and they grow back the next season. But sometimes we're gonna go for the jugular, if you will, and we go for that core belief. But we sometimes that could take time to get to the core belief, so it's fine. Just address whatever's there for you, and we can just keep it moving forward.
So,
And yeah, Emma's going to share a personal story again to kind of show how sometimes these things can also interact and interrelate. So I'm going to ask her to do that for us.
Right. So one of the obstacles, I mentioned an obstacle that was a very specific situation earlier. Another obstacle that I run into has to do with my perceptions of how other people are going to view me, or my assumptions about how other people are going to view me. So I am very young in my career. I'm also chronologically fairly young at the moment. And so I have a fear that if I'm getting up in front of a group such as this, or if I'm leading a project, that folks are not going to take me seriously because of my age. And they're not going to think that I have something worthwhile to contribute or offer. And so that is an obstacle that I am constantly coming up against and having to figure out how to work through. And so I could decide to then not volunteer for things like this. I could feel that self-doubt and decide not to email Catherine to ask her if she wanted to do a conference proposal with me. But I did choose in this particular instance to take that risk and go for it. And not give in to that worry that I don't have anything worthwhile to say, or somebody else would have something better that's more worth your time than having me up here. That was kind of my fear.
Yeah,
right.
Thank you. I'm going to share, I'm off book right now. I'm going to share a quick example of just personally, for me, sometimes I used to think that like, I have to have a mentor. I have to have someone to train me, someone to show me the ropes. And it could, if you're new to something early in your career, whatever the situation might be, sometimes you're waiting for like someone to train you and show you the ropes. And I had to get to the place like, some people don't have mentors, or sometimes it's just like you're doing something new, or you want to do something that's kind of creative and maybe doesn't exist. And so it's kind of like, okay, Catherine, you just figure it out. Just go for it, and you can learn as you go. So if you're your own obstacle, or you're waiting for someone else to kind of give you permission, sometimes that might be something that you just have to say, you know what, I'm just going to do it, and I'll learn, and it's going to be okay.
So what I'd like you to do, this is just going to be you writing down for yourself, no discussion this time. So with whatever yes or idea of a yes that you could work towards that you've come up with, I want you to just, on the back side of your handout, list out all of the obstacles that you can think of that are currently getting in the way of you saying yes to that opportunity. All right? So we're just going to take a minute or so to just jot down any obstacle you think is currently getting in the way of your yes.
We have control over, we don't have control over. Okay, thank you for reminding me. I'll do it. I'll do it here, I guess, on the next one. Oh, because they would have to mark it. They will mark it later, but just okay. Explain the concept. Okay. Okay, I'll do it before I go into the next one. Then. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You don't have to fill up every line, however many obstacles you come up with. Hopefully there's not as many obstacles as there are lines, but there could be. Okay. Okay, so let's come on back to the front, and Catherine's going to share a little bit more about the different types of obstacles that we might be facing.
Yeah, so this is going to be really important, especially when we talk about the strategies, because the strategy that you're going to want to use or that is likely to be most effective depends on if the obstacle is in your control or outside of your control. Because to try to control something that you don't have control over will be a lot of wasted resources. So that's really important to distinguish between. Just to briefly give you a quick sense here with this chart. So behaviors in our control, 100% control of our behaviors. Our thoughts, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Once we become aware of what's going on in our head, then we can change it and do something with it. But sometimes it's unconscious, we just don't know. We have these core beliefs or beliefs in general, and we just don't know that it's really there. So sometimes with anything that's going on in our head. Emotions, that's the thing that we don't really have control over. It's communication to us. And so, I can't just say, oh, I want to be happy and now I'm happy. Or I want to be angry and now I'm they just come. It's a response or reaction to something. And so we can acknowledge that, okay, this is what's going on, this is how I'm feeling, and then we choose how we want to respond to that experience. So we do have control over how we respond to that experience. But the fact that it's there, sometimes it just shows up when we don't want it to be there, but it's communication, and we always want to pay attention to it. And culture is more like culture and interpersonal, so I kind of tried to make the colors correspond to the ones that we don't have control over versus the ones that we do, versus the ones that sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Culture is like more environmental, interpersonal, other people. And so again, we can do things to increase the chance of something happening between us and someone else, but we really don't control other people. Same thing for like the environment. So again, we can influence and do things when it comes to like a system. Anytime one thing in a system changes, it impacts the whole system. But for the most part, we don't control that system, or we don't control the environment. So that's going to be important to understand. Do I have control? Do I not have control? How do I want to respond to this obstacle? Understanding those dynamics.
I've heard you relate it to the idea of like putting a lot of energy into trying to push a huge boulder that's an obstacle that you don't have control over. And if you want that boulder to be somewhere else, it might be worthwhile to push a little bit in that direction and see if it moves. But if that's taking up the majority of your energy, there might be other things that you do have control over that you could be spending that energy on that you might see the results more quickly or more directly. So that's kind of the idea there too.
Yep. All right, ready for strategies. What to do with the obstacles.
What are we going to do?
What are we going to do? Call Emma. Send her an email. Emma knows people. All right, so I'm going to give you 3 strategies here. And for the most part, I tried to make it like, okay, no matter what the obstacle is, for the most part, one of these should be able to work. That's the goal. I can't guarantee 100%, but it's highly likely. So change. With change, we're talking about 2 types of change. So one is the environment in terms of like, change is a part of life and things change all the time. And so sometimes things around us are changing and we don't like it and we don't want it to change. And so, part of that is like us relating differently to that change and us maybe needing to acknowledge that things do change. And then what also happens too in the midst of change, and so when you think about like organizational change is there's like I'm trying to remember the word for it, but basically things around you are changing. You as an individual are a part of that change, but you are in a place of transition. So there's a change that's happening, and because of that change, you are in transition. So what that means is that now you're letting go of something that's old, you're letting go of that. Now you're in a place of, transition, and the place that you're going to is embracing that place of change or that new thing. So when something's changing, that's where you are. And so one of the things that's important is to have compassion and acknowledge, hey, I'm in a place of transition and it's kind of rough. And you're gonna move along that journey. The second thing about change is sometimes when we're talking about something that you have control over, or sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. So if we're talking about thoughts or behaviors, sometimes that's part of the change too, where I'm having these beliefs that are not serving me well. What if I mess up? What if I can't do a good job? So we're having these thoughts, this constant stream of thoughts, and sometimes the appropriate course of action is to change those thoughts into something that's going to be more helpful. Like, okay, I can do it. Worst case scenario, it fails. I pick myself up and I keep it moving. So changing those thoughts or that rhetoric or that, that message, that the streaming stuff in your mind. I'll talk about what you can do when you can't change it, what's going on in your head, which sometimes it happens. Relationships. And so I'm talking about it now, relationships. So we're talking about changing relationships to things. And so, for example, when we're thinking about emotions, the tendency when we're experiencing something that's like a negative emotion, like maybe fear or anger, the tendency is to do whatever we can to get away from that thing that's triggering that or that's provoking that. And I'm gonna say, don't do that. Do the opposite. So first of all, you're gonna recognize that this is here. You're gonna pay attention to it. You're not gonna try to escape it. And then you're gonna say, okay, what's gonna be the best way for me to respond to this? So you're changing the relationship that you have to that thing. You're not gonna try to escape it. You're not gonna run away. You're not going to, do whatever you can to prevent it from being there. You're going to embrace it and actually walk towards it. And sometimes whatever it is you're looking for is on the other side of that. So remember the little diagram that I said, like overcoming the obstacle and what you want's on the other side? That yes sometimes is on the other side. So we don't wanna go in the opposite direction. Same thing with thoughts sometimes. And so the reality is like everything that we think isn't necessarily true. And so we're just not gonna buy into everything that comes into our head. So if we have these like constant stream of thoughts, and I know Karen mentioned, in the presentation I was in earlier, sometimes we just have these doubts or we have these things that happen, and it's not gonna be a great use of our energy to try to change them. So we're just gonna say, there's that thought again. We don't buy into the content of everything that we think. So that's the relationship again. We're gonna just, acknowledge that it's there, but not necessarily buy into the content of it. Final thing is radical acceptance. And so this is going to be important when we talk about what we have control over and what we don't have control over. Radical acceptance is a tool to interact with things that we don't have control over. So you can think about it as like tug of war. And the more you are pulling this thing, the more it pulls back. So you're just kind of in this tug of war. And radical acceptance is basically saying, I'm going to put down the rope. I'm not going to play anymore. I'm going to accept that this is what it is. And then I'm going to use my energy and my resources and my hands to now engage in things that I actually do have control over and that I can affect change. Radical acceptance is not saying this thing that I don't have control over is okay. You're not saying you like it, but you're just acknowledging that, this is what it is. And it differs from regular acceptance because it's radical, because with your everything, you're saying, okay, this is what it is. So that's radical acceptance. These are our 3 tools. Questions? How do we feel so far? All right. So now we're going to practice.
Yes. So we are going to just take, this is going to be quick. So maybe just do one for each of you with your partner. But I want you to talk with your partner about one of the obstacles you identified. Do you think you have control over it or not when you really think about it? And what strategy do you think is going to best apply? So we're just going to take about a minute and a half to do this. So it's going to be fast, but looking at your obstacles with your partner, thinking about in my control, not in my control, partially in my control. That's another option, right? Sometimes things are somewhat in our control. And what strategy do you think is the best fit for that obstacle? All right, let's go ahead. So what we'd like you to do is share out. It's going to be a multi-part share out this time. So what was your yes? What was your obstacle? Do you think you have control over that obstacle or not, or somewhat? And what strategy did you pick? So who wants to be our first volunteer to tell us those 4 things?
You're smiling, Tim. Are you?
See, this is the problem when we know people, is that you can call them out by name. Yes, go ahead.
I'm not sure what the yes is. Is it the value?
So the yes is the thing that you would be trying to get to, the opportunity that you're hoping to pursue.
Okay, so the value is collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And whether they're fulfilled or not. But then the obstacle was lack of communication.
Okay.
So, and then partially within control, because it's a different department.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just tell them to communicate. Right? It's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
So partially in my control, and the strategy would be to engage, rather than emails that they don't respond to, engage in person with meetings that are not critical decision-making meetings, but just check in.
Mm-hmm.
How are things going? Get to know you, build relationship.
Yeah, okay. So just to make sure I understand. So the value that you have is you value collaboration. It sounds like you're not experiencing that currently, so you would like to be in a place where you're collaborating more with another department. The obstacle is that you're not having good communication with that department right now. And you're thinking that's partially in your control because you're one of the communicators, right? And part of it's not in your control because there's other folks that you're communicating with. And so then the strategy was going to be changing your approach a little bit and coming up with ways to have more connection or communication or meetings with that other department that are less tactical and more relationship building. Is that correct? Great.
Right on, right on. And so you're changing your behaviors and you're also changing kind of how you're thinking about it in a more flexible way of how can I come at it in a different way. So yeah, that's really great.
Yeah, so
Going through the door too, because up until now, I've been waiting for them.
Wonderful.
But
right.
it's not a pleasant place to go into their space.
So also talks about that emotional component then, because if it's not pleasant, it means there's a reason you weren't going there before. And so now you're willing to navigate that experience to go and build those relationships. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Right.
Am I
So
understanding correctly?
Yes.
You're kind of like,
So
yeah.
rather than waiting for them to come to you, you're thinking about what you can do to impact on the situation. So with the 3 different strategies that you talked about, how would you place those techniques or those?
I mean, it sounds like all of them, like behaviors, he's changing what he's doing, emotions, right? I'm not avoiding that feeling of discomfort. There's a reason you hadn't done it before, probably. And also just thinking about it differently.
Wonderful. All right. That's going to be a hard
and
act to-
radical acceptance, right? He's accepting, hey, they're not coming to me. You
Yes.
can wait all day long, and it's like, hey, they're just not going to come, and I can just sit here, or I can, look for other alternatives.
Yeah.
It also speaks to the culture bubble too, because that's how the cultures have been in existence, and I'm breaking down that.
And that matters.
Right.
I'm telling you, when one person changes their behaviors, it has an impact.
On the
So that
culture.
matters. So good for you on the culture. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Right on. Good for
Yeah.
you.
So yeah, just the culture has been established already, and you're going to try and disrupt that a bit. All right, that's going to be a hard act to follow, but we can do it. Can I hear another volunteer? So, what is the opportunity you're moving towards? What was the obstacle you identified? In your control or not in your control? And what's your strategy going to be?
I can share it.
Thank you, Gina.
Okay, so I feel like my values, I am getting them in my position, but I've been in my role for a year now, so I've become more comfortable with so one of my values is variety of tasks and the opportunity to lead. So I lead projects, and one of the things that I'm projecting in the future as I stay in my role longer is an obstacle that I'm going to have is being okay to try new projects because I'm going to be so used to mine. So with that, I do have control over that, and a strategy for me is to think about, for me, one of my goals is to continue to grow as a professional, and if I want to do that in my role and I have the opportunities to try different projects and tasks on my team, just reminding myself of that ultimate goal, because that's going to allow me to seek those opportunities in my current role before looking for another position.
Great.
So it goes to that mindset and perception.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. So just to reiterate, so I make sure we understand. So the value is you like to have a variety of tasks and projects. You also like to lead projects. In the future, you'd like to try new projects other than the ones that you have currently. So that's kind of what you're moving towards. You want to say yes to new projects. The obstacle you're anticipating is that you're going to get comfortable in your role and be afraid to try something new, possibly for fear that it wouldn't go well.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay, great. And that's it, that you think that is within your control. And so your strategy is going to be to, when you have that thought or that doubt, to remind yourself of your ultimate goal, which is to grow, and that by taking risks and challenging yourself, that's how you're going to grow as a professional. Correct?
Yes.
Great.
Right on.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Let's do one more if we can.
That's our 5-minute warning.
One more example, please. I think it really helps to hear other folks talking through this so you can kind of see the progression and see how that might apply into your own situation. Bridget, can I pick on you since I know you?
I really thought of how to frame it here. Let's see.
We can help frame it.
Okay, help me
Yeah,
frame it.
yeah.
Emma and I used to work together.
Yeah.
So we have this camaraderie established.
A relationship, if you will.
That's right, exactly. Definitely a friendly relationship. Okay. Well, fortunately, my top career values, I'll just read them off to you. I'm finding that I am fulfilled with that in my current role. Collaborating with others, although I do find that having some autonomy is also important to me. Creativity, influencing others, problem solving, and having a variety of tasks.
Okay.
What I'm finding that there are a couple of current challenges. One is taking on a higher level of responsibility, of which I am definitely ready for, and I have the experience both within my current role and most of it is in previous positions on campus and earlier in my career. And hoping that the level of trust that has been built up over the past couple of years in this current position, I hope will support my request to take the position to a higher level internally. I'm not looking to go out, but really to grow it, to make it stronger within.
Okay.
And while simultaneously continuing to manage the multiple projects that we're all taking on within our program as we're growing quite a bit. And so I'm having to be mindful of the fact that one thing I cannot control is the volume that we have that is still something that we're going to be continuing with, even if I'm taking on a higher level of responsibility requests for that.
All right.
Okay.
Great. Okay. So let's summarize so far. So you have would you say that this goal is connected to your value of influencing others? That could be one of the values that it might fulfill if you're in a little bit more of a leadership role?
Yes, I would say influencing others and a higher level of collaboration with my team.
Okay, great. So the values are influencing others and collaboration.
Yes.
And the thing that you would like to do is move into a position where you have more leadership, so you have more opportunities to do that.
Yeah.
The obstacle that you are seeing as you look ahead is the volume of work.
Yes.
So that is a limiting factor on how much of a leadership role you feel you might be able to take on, or that's how you're seeing it right now.
Yes.
And do you feel like you have control over that or not? You said you don't think you have control over that because it's your department, right?
Yes, the volume is not going to change.
Right.
However, what I'm thinking is, which will be part of my proposal during my review in the next couple of weeks, is working with our work studies students in particular to help to manage the volume that will not be changing, but to really essentially be delegating more of my responsibilities towards them.
Okay, so the volume of work not within your control, and the strategy is going to be thinking more creatively about how you can utilize your work study student, which is a resource that your department already has,
That's right.
in order to help manage the volume of work so that as you're moving into more of a leadership role, hopefully you can still do that and also not feel too overwhelmed by the volume, correct?
That's right.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, Catherine, how would you say that fits in our different categories here?
Yeah, that's really great. What I would love to, if I can,
Yes.
what you were saying actually was reminding me of our last tip as we wrap up. But I love it because this is our last tip, which what can get us stuck sometimes is if we think we have two options. So in your story, it could be like, I either stay where I am and not be fully fulfilled, or I take on this leadership role, have a volume of work, and that's it. Two options.
Right.
Dichotomous. When we do that, we get stuck. And so the ruler represents like how many numbers are between 0 and 1.
Right. So yeah.
What would you guys say?
How many numbers are between 0 and 1?
Infinite number.
Infinite number.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So it is, the answer is it is an infinite number if we think back to our high school algebra class when we learned about decimal points. But the other thing that's interesting about a ruler is that only certain of those numbers are actually marked and easily visible, right? You can see 0.5, you can see 0.75 marked on here, but you can't see 0.0001, it's not one of the lines, right? But it is there, it exists, according to mathematicians who, I don't know. But according to them, it exists, right? So
Bridget's example illustrated that in terms of there were other ways to navigate that weren't immediately obvious, but you kind of figured that out as you started thinking creatively and like, I'm going to get to this yes, and so I can figure out how.
That's right.
So excellent job. Thank you for that. So this concludes our presentation, actually.
Yeah, and so on your handout, you also have the opportunity to make yourself a little task list. So if you have been able to think of something today that is an opportunity that you would like to move towards, maybe Bridget, your first step is finding your work-study student schedule and seeing how many hours are they eligible for. Are we maximizing their hours right now? Does their schedule need to change? Do their duties need to change? So just looking at what are they doing right now, that could be your first step, right? So what is your first step? What's your second step? How are you going to move forward towards that goal? And hopefully this will help you when you do come up against those obstacles, because you are going to face these obstacles. These obstacles are real, and they are challenging, and that the reason we haven't done these things before now is because they are challenging, right? And so acknowledging that and just thinking about, what do we have control over? What can we have an impact on? And would that help us feel like we have a greater sense of autonomy and ownership over our own careers? So thank you so much for being here. Please do the session evaluation, and thank you so much for your participation.